We've come so far with these two. From a half-dug pond to a promise made in the dark. From 20 years of silence to a door opened with trembling hands. Now it's time to see if wounds this old can really heal. 2 weeks after the visit, Diep woke to find James already dressed, standing by the window. "What are you doing up so early?" She pulled the blanket closer. "Thinking," he turned. "About your mother. About the invitation you made." Diep sat up slowly. "I meant it, but I don't know when. Maybe next month. Maybe 33. Maybe. This weekend." James said it gently but firmly. "Let's invite her this weekend. That's too soon. Or it's 20 years too late." He sat on the bed. "Diep. Every day you wait is another day she's sitting in that house wondering if you meant it. Another day Nee could be spending with her grandmother." Diep's hands twisted in the blanket, the same way they always did when fear dressed up as hesitation. What if it's awkward? What if we don't know what to say to each other? Then we eat in silence. James took her hands, stilling them. "But we eat together. That's the point." That afternoon, James borrowed the neighbor's phone. Diep held the slip of paper with her mother's number given during that tearful goodbye 2 weeks ago, like it might dissolve. "You want me to dial?" James asked. "No, I'll do it." She punched in the numbers. Each beep felt like a step closer to something she couldn't take back. 3 rings. 4. Then a voice, breathless. "Hello? Mom?" The words still felt strange, foreign and familiar at once. "It's Diep." Silence. Then a sound that might have been crying or laughing or both. "Diep. I didn't think you'd call so soon. I promised I would." Diep closed her eyes. "And I wanted to ask, would you like to come visit us this weekend? Come see our home. Meet us here." More silence. Longer this time. "Are you sure?" "I don't want to impose. I'm sure." And saying it, Diep realized she was. "Saturday. Take the morning bus. James will pick you up at the station." "I'll be there." Her mother's voice broke. "Thank you. Thank you for..." "Saturday," Diep repeated, and hung up before the emotions could overwhelm the words. Saturday morning came too fast and too slow. Diep cleaned the house 3 times, cooked enough food for 10 people, changed her shirt twice. "Mum, why are you so nervous?" Nee watched from the doorway. "Grandmother already loves you." "How do you know that?" "Because she cried when she saw you." Nee said it like it was obvious. People only cry like that when they love you very much. Children, they see everything adults complicate. James left on the borrowed motorbike at 10. The bus was due at 10:30. Diep stood in the kitchen, staring at the food she'd prepared, wondering if her mother even liked these dishes anymore. What if 20 years had changed everything? What if they were strangers who happened to share DNA and old photographs? Nee tugged her sleeve. "Mom, come look at the pond. The fish are really big now." They walked outside together. The pond James had dug with his own hands, filled with water and life. Nee's room stood finished beside it, small, bright, perfect. Everything they'd built, everything they'd become. "Do you think grandmother will like it here?" Nee asked. "I don't know, sweetheart. I think she will." Nee picked up a pebble, tossed it in the water. "Because we're here. And we're her family now. And here's what children teach us. Family isn't complicated. Love isn't complicated. Adults make it complicated by remembering every hurt and forgetting every moment of grace." The motorbike sound cut through the morning. James appeared first, then heard Diep's mother, climbing off carefully, clutching a small bag. She looked smaller here, older, more fragile than she'd seemed in her own house. Their eyes met across the yard. "Hi, Mom." Diep's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Hi, daughter." Her mother's eyes filled immediately. "You're home. It's beautiful. It's small. It's yours." She stepped closer. That makes it beautiful. Nee ran forward, fearless. Grandmother, come see my room. Dad built it just for me. And just like that, the ice broke. Her mother let herself be pulled along by a child's enthusiasm, leaving the adults to follow. This is where I sleep now. Nee showed off her small bed, her shelf of treasures, her window that looked out at the pond. And see? I can watch the fish from here. It's perfect. Her mother's voice shook. Absolutely perfect. James appeared in the doorway. I'll start preparing lunch. You three take your time. He left them there, 3 generations of women, in a small room built by love and labor. Diep's mother sat on the bed carefully. Your father would have loved this, seeing you like this, happy, building something real. You said he saw me once, 3 years ago. Diep leaned against the wall. Why didn't he say something? Because you were smiling. Her mother's hand went to her heart. He came home and said, she's smiling, really smiling. We can't disrupt that, he thought. We both thought, maybe you were better off without us dragging you back into old pain. He was wrong. I know, but we didn't. She looked up. We didn't know you were still hurting, still wondering, still carrying that weight. Nee climbed onto the bed beside her grandmother. Mom doesn't hurt anymore. She has Dad now. And me. We make her happy. I can see that, sweetheart. She pulled Nee close. I can see that very clearly. Lunch was simple. Rice, fish from the pond, vegetables from the garden, everything they'd grown or caught themselves. Nothing fancy. Nothing that required wealth or status or anything except time and care. Diep's mother ate slowly, savoring each bite like it was sacred. You caught these fish? She pointed at her plate. James and Nee did. Diep smiled. I'm not very good at fishing yet. I get impatient. Your father was the same way. The word slipped out, then caught. Sorry. I don't know if you want to hear about him. I do. Diep set down her chopsticks. I want to know everything. All the years I missed. All the stories I should have heard growing up. Her mother's eyes glistened. He was stubborn, like you. Once he decided something, that was it. When the debt collectors came, I wanted to run together, all 3 of us. But he said no, said he'd stay and face them, buy us time. I should have fought harder, should have. You did what you could. James spoke quietly. Sometimes love means making impossible choices, but the wrong choice. There was no right choice. Diep interrupted, her voice firm but not harsh. You were 19, scared, desperate. You did what you thought would save me. It didn't save you. It lost you. No. Diep reached across the table. Your sister lost me. The system lost me. Circumstances lost me. You never stopped looking. That's what matters. And here's what nobody tells you about forgiveness. It's not about forgetting what happened. It's about deciding that what happens next matters more. Her mother gripped Diep's hand. I don't deserve this. This kindness. This chance. Maybe not. Diep's voice cracked. But I'm giving it anyway. Because holding on to anger for 20 more years won't give me back the years I lost. It'll just waste the years I have left. Nee looked between them, confused by the heavy air. Are you fighting? No, sweetheart. Diep's mother wiped her eyes. We're healing. Sometimes it looks the same. After lunch, they walked to the pond together. James showed Diep's mother the embankments he'd built, the pigsty he'd constructed, the garden they'd planted. You did all this yourself? She stared at him. A CEO did all this? A man in love did all this. James corrected gently. The CEO part doesn't matter anymore. Your father would have respected you. She said it quietly. He always said real men build things, not empires. Things. Homes. Families. Futures. James nodded, throat tight. They sat by the pond, 4 people watching fish swim lazy circles. Nee threw breadcrumbs, delighted when they surfaced. I brought something. Diep's mother pulled out a photo album from her bag. I wasn't sure if you'd want to see it, but she opened it carefully. Photos of Diep as a baby, as a toddler, the 5 years before everything fell apart. A little girl who looked exactly like Nhi, grinning gap-toothed at the camera. I was happy then. Diep touched the photos gently. I remember being happy. You were so loved. Her mother's finger traced a photo. Every single day, they flipped through pages. Birthday parties, first steps, ordinary moments that became precious because they ended too soon. Then the photos stopped. The rest of the album, empty pages. 20 years of blank space. I kept it. Her mother's voice dropped to a whisper, hoping someday I could fill them again. With you, with your life. With grandchildren I prayed I'd meet. Diep looked at Nhi, splashing by the water's edge. At James, sitting patient and steady beside her. At her mother, who'd carried an empty photo album for 2 decades like a promise. We can fill them now, she said it simply. If you want. Her mother's breath caught. Really? Really? Diep stood up. James, can you get the camera? What happened next was ordinary and extraordinary. James taking photos, Nhi posing with her grandmother, showing off the fish, the room, the life she lived. Diep standing beside her mother, awkward at first, then relaxing into it. Click. 3 generations by the pond. Click. Grandmother and granddaughter holding a fish. Click. Diep and her mother, arms around each other, smiling through tears. This one. Her mother looked at the last photo James showed her. This is the one I've been waiting 20 years to see. The sun started dropping, evening coming on soft and gentle. I should go. Her mother stood reluctantly. The last bus. Do. Stay. Diep said it before thinking. Stay tonight. There's room. We'll make up a bed. You can go back tomorrow. I don't want to impose. You're not imposing. James stood too. Your family. Family doesn't impose. Her mother's face crumpled. That word. Family. After 20 years of being alone, that word landing like grace. Okay, she whispered. If you're sure. We're sure. Dinner was louder than lunch. Nhi chattering about school. James telling stories about learning to farm. Diep's mother sharing memories carefully, testing each one to see if it was welcome. They were all welcome. Every single one. After Nhi went to bed, the 3 adults sat outside, stars coming out one by one, the pond reflecting moonlight like scattered diamonds. I need to tell you something. Diep's mother spoke into the darkness. Your father's last words. I didn't tell you before, because I wasn't sure you were ready. I'm ready now, he said. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I love her. And tell her to be happy. That's all I ever wanted, just her happiness. Her voice broke. He died believing he'd failed you. I need you to know he never stopped trying, never stopped loving you. Diep closed her eyes. 20 years of anger, of wondering, of carrying the weight of abandonment. And it all came down to this. A father who loved her. A mother who never stopped searching. A loss that broke them all. I forgive him. The words came out steady. Clear. True. I forgive both of you. Her mother sobbed deep, wrenching sounds that came from a place beyond words. James stood quietly. I'll give you 2 some time. He disappeared into the house, and under the stars, beside a pond built by love, 2 women held each other and cried for everything lost and everything found. Morning came gentle. Diep woke to find her mother already up, helping James prepare breakfast. The sight stopped her in the doorway, two people who both loved her, working side by side like they'd been doing it for years. "Good morning," her mother smiled. "I hope you don't mind. I couldn't sleep, so I thought I'd make myself useful." "I don't mind." Diep stepped into the kitchen. "It's nice." They ate together, Nee sleepy-eyed and quiet for once. The kind of peaceful breakfast families have when they're comfortable with silence. After, Diep's mother packed her small bag slowly, reluctant, like leaving might break whatever fragile thing they'd built. "When will you come back?" Nee asked, clinging to her grandmother's hand. "Whenever your mother invites me." "Then I invite you for next weekend," Nee announced. "And the weekend after that? And after that?" "I agree." Everyone laughed, the sound light and real and full of promise. At the bus stop, Diep's mother turned back one more time. "Thank you for giving me a second chance I don't deserve. Eat tea. Everyone deserves a second chance." Diep hugged her tight. "Even people who think they don't. I'll call you every week, if that's okay." "It's okay." Diep pulled back. "More than okay." The bus arrived. Her mother climbed on, choosing a window seat. As it pulled away, she pressed her hand to the glass. Diep raised hers in return. And just like that, 20 years of separation started becoming something else. Not erased, not forgotten, but transformed into something that could grow instead of fester. Walking home, James took Diep's hand. "You did good. We did good," she corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "That's not true. You're stronger than you think." "Maybe," she leaned against him. "But I'm glad I didn't have to find out." Back at the house, Nee was already at the pond, talking to the fish like they were old friends. The room James built stood ready. The garden grew steady. The life they'd made with their own hands continued, simple and real. That evening, as the sun painted everything gold, Diep stood watching her family, James fixing a fence, Nee collecting eggs from the chickens. Ordinary work, ordinary life. But here's the thing about ordinary. It's only ordinary until you've lived without it. Until you've spent years wondering if you'd ever belong anywhere. Until someone chooses you every single morning and proves that love isn't words. It's showing up. It's digging ponds. It's making phone calls that terrify you. It's opening doors you've kept locked for 20 years. "Mom," Nee called out. "Come help us." Diep walked toward them. Her daughter. Her partner. Her life. And somewhere 2 provinces away, a woman sat in a quiet house looking at photos from the weekend. 3 generations smiling by a pond, empty album pages finally filling with life and light, and all the moments she thought she'd lost forever. The gossip in the village would continue. People would still talk, but it didn't matter anymore. Because Diep had something they couldn't touch with their words, a family built on choice and forgiveness and dirt under fingernails. James looked up as she approached. "Everything okay?" "Everything's perfect." And saying it, she realized it was true. Not perfect like a fairy tale. Perfect like real life when you stop running from pain and start building something better. Perfect like forgiveness that doesn't erase the past but refuses to let it poison the future. Perfect like a man who traded everything for love and a woman who learned she was worth it. That night, after Nee fell asleep, Diep and James sat outside. The pond still and quiet. The stars watching like they'd been there all along, waiting for this moment. "Do you ever regret it?" Diep asked. "Giving up everything to be here?" James was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Every morning I wake up and you're beside me, I know I made the right choice. Every time Nee calls me Dad, I know I made the right choice. Every time I dig in this dirt and build something real, I know I made the right choice. Even when it's hard? Especially when it's hard." He took her hand. "Because the hard things are the ones worth doing. They sat in comfortable silence. Two people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd built a life from nothing, who'd opened doors that had been locked for decades and found healing on the other side. In the distance, a phone rang. Diep's borrowed phone. She answered. "Hi, daughter," her mother's voice, small but hopeful. "I just wanted to say goodnight. And I love you." 3 words, so simple, so impossibly heavy with 20 years of waiting. "I love you too, Mom." Diep said it back, easier this time. "Good night." She hung up, looked at James, and smiled. Because here's what all of it was for this moment, this peace, this ordinary, extraordinary life where families heal and ponds hold fish and little girls sleep safe knowing they're loved. The secrets were gone, the wounds were cleaning, the door was open, and that was enough.